I move that the bill be now read a second time. Today I introduce the Wyong Special Area Protection Bill 2018, which keeps an election promise made by the New South Wales Labor opposition and Mr David Harris MP during the 2015 state election campaign. In a twist of historical irony, it also keeps a promise made by the Liberal Party at each of the 2007 and 2011 election campaigns, a promise that to this day they have not honoured, and I will speak more of that later. This is an act to prohibit the granting, renewal or modification of exploration, prospecting and mining authorities and titles for minerals and petroleum and certain planning approvals that relate to land at Wyong that is the site of the Wallarah 2 coal mine project and for other purposes. The Act defines the Wyong Special Area in Clause 3 as the area defined to mean the land subject to certain exploration licences and an authorisation granted under the Mining Act 1992, namely EL 6514, EL 4911 and A405. Clause 4 prohibits the granting or renewal of any mining authorisation in relation to land in the Wyong Special Area and the making of any changes to the conditions to which such an authorisation is subject. Clause 5 prohibits the granting or renewal of any petroleum title in relation to and defined in the Act and the making of any changes to the conditions to which such a title is subject. Clause 6 provides that a planning approval is not to be given under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979 in relation to development for the purposes of prospecting and mining activities on the land in the Wyong Special Area and cancels any such planning approval already given. The bill seeks to protect the Wyong water catchment area from the destructive mining, thereby protecting the important water supply which services over 300,000 people. Further, the bill is required to fulfil an allegedly ironclad election commitment made by the Liberal Party in 2007 and 2011, and of course by my party, the Labor opposition, in 2015. The South Korean government-owned mining company, Kores, submitted under the Wallarah 2 coal project a new application to build a long-wall coal mine beneath the Wyong water catchment valley, affecting the Duralong and Yarramalong valleys. These valleys are the major drinking water resource for more than 350,000 people. Wyong Shire Council, Gosford Council and the Joint Water Authority engaged Professor Philip Pells to prepare the water section of their submission against the Wallarah 2 coal project. Professor Pells demonstrated using the mining company's own data that there would be a catastrophic loss of water in the catchment if the proposal proceeded. In 1999, when BHP Billiton owned the lease under its subsidiary Coal Operations Australia Limited, their well-credentialed and respected hydrology consultants Mitchell McCotter found in their report, produced in 1999, that there were transient pathways in the geology enabling surface water and aquifer water to travel to the mine workings if mining occurred. These facts were presented at the Chikurovsky inquiry in 2008 and was ignored by the panel members. In March 2011, prior to the state election in that year, the then Minister for Planning, Tony Kelly, rejected the mine proposal. He said in a letter to the community group fighting against the mine, the Australian Coal Alliance, and I quote, "The project does not adequately address potential surface water quality impacts, resulting in uncertainty around the ability of the project to meet acceptable water quality outcomes." Unquote. The Minister further said when rejecting the mining application, and I further quote, "The project is not considered consistent with the principles of ecologically sustainable development, including the precautionary principle, and as a consequence is not considered to be in the public interest." Unquote. Leading up to this decision, the Liberal Party in opposition championed the cause of the community against the mining project, and the two particular proponents, of course, were Chris Harcher and Barry O'Farrell. The Liberal Party committed itself in writing twice that if elected, it would not allow the coal mine proposal in the water catchment valleys. Barry O'Farrell stood before a crowd of more than 300 people at a rally in January 2009 and said, and I quote, "The next Liberal National Government will not allow mining to occur here. We will not allow mining to occur in any water catchment. Mining leases and mining permits will reflect that common sense. No ifs, no buts, a guarantee." Unquote. Mr O'Farrell said in an email to community leader Alan Hayes the day after the rally, and I further quote, "I especially appreciate the opportunity to reiterate the Liberal Party's opposition to the coal mining proposal and our determination in office to prevent it going ahead." Unquote. Prior to the March 2011 election, the Liberal Party said, again in writing, that it was now Liberal Party policy that there would be no coal mining in the Wyong water catchment valleys.
David.
They ran their election campaign on the Central Coast on the back of the anti-coal mine campaign, engaged the community's assistance through the Australian Coal Alliance, and proudly wore their water not coal t-shirts and waved the water not coal placards throughout the 4 state seats of the Central Coast, which of course they won on the back largely of that particular campaign. And ironically, one of the casualties at that election was David Harris, the then member for Wyong, now again the current member for Wyong, who, despite ensuring that the previous Labor government had rejected the application, was tagged with the allegation somehow that he and Labor supported the mining proposal, Mr President, which they did not. And of course, the Liberal Party won those 4 seats on the promise that they would legislate to stop this. Chris Hartcher said on ABC Radio after the 2011 election, quote, "No candidate would have been elected on the Central Coast had they not opposed the coal mine," unquote. He also said in a press release sent to Alan Hayes in April 2011 and published in a local community newspaper, and I quote, "Having attended a number of public meetings and having been fully briefed by the Australian Coal Alliance in 2007, the Liberal Party, through its leader Barry O'Farrell, declared support for the community campaign against the coal mine and pledged to ban the coal mine with legislation in the Parliament if necessary, if elected in 2011. Unquote. Mr Hartcher further said in the same press release, and again I quote, "On the 4th March, the last day at law they could make a decision, the Labor Party caved into community pressure and the ACA's campaign and promised what the Liberals had promised 4 years earlier." Well, not exactly. The Liberals promised to introduce legislation to ban mining beneath the water catchment area around Wyong, unquote. Barry O'Farrell confirmed to local residents at the Community Cabinet meeting held in Gosford in December 2012 that the mine would not proceed. Mr President, despite these supposedly repeated and ironclad promises in writing and in public, the New South Wales Liberal National Government has repeatedly failed to deliver on those commitments and have allowed the South Korean mining company Kores to pursue this project. Now, the Liberals and Nationals have said that New South Wales could be subject to legal proceedings if they didn't allow the planning process in connection with the project to proceed. Now, that's not correct. 127(1) of the Mining Act states, and I quote, "The holder of an authority is not entitled to compensation merely because the authority is cancelled," unquote. The term authority includes both exploration licences and mining leases. The government, current government, could and should have acted on this, but have not. And once again, the community on the Central Coast is at risk, and I'll develop that theme. Professor Pells was once again retained by local government and the Joint Water Authority to provide a report in their opposition to the Wallarah 2 coal project when a second EIS was submitted. He proved once again, using the proponents' own data in their new environmental impact statement, that there will be an unacceptable loss of the Central Coast's major drinking resource if the project proceeded. Also, pages 9 to 17 of the EIS health assessment risks contain a full analysis of the possible increased risks of death and sickness from the dust generated from the mine. The mine surface facility is adjacent to the largest urban growth area in the region, and the mortality figures in the EIS are quoted by the proponent as being conservative and do not take into account the growing population of the area or the large volume of traffic travelling along the F3 expressway or the link road past it. Now, perhaps honourable members in this chamber would like to turn their minds to this question: which Central Coast families want to sacrifice the well-being of their loved ones or put at risk their water resources so that a South Korean mining company can extract coal for the needs of South Korea or for the profits of such a mining company? The risks embodied in this proposal are not acceptable. The Central Coast region already has the highest rate of avoidable respiratory-related deaths in the country. Dr Peter Lewis, Director of Public Health for the Central Coast in North Sydney, said in his report prepared for the Wallarah 2 submission, and I quote, "Increased particulate exposure from the Wallarah 2 coal surface facilities could cause deaths, require hospital admissions, and make children have more chest colds, nighttime coughs, and trips to the doctor, unquote. He further stated that the mortality and morbidity figures would be sevenfold than those estimated by the mine proponent. His report, of course, only became public after being uncovered by the Australian Coal Alliance, but was still ignored by the State Planning and Assessment Commission for the previous Wallarah 2 submission. Wallarah 2 further admitted in Appendix H of the EIS that 245 homes would be subsided by up to 1 metre and in some cases 2 metres. They state, and I quote, "The overall movement predicted for the houses within the study area are greater than those predicted to have occurred for the houses at Tarmore, Taralba, Westcliff and West Wallsend collieries. It is expected that impacts would be greater for these houses in the study area," unquote. In addition, 755 rural structures and 420 rural dams will be subsided to varying degrees. Duralong and Jillaby Road is predicted to fall 1.75 metres in places, as well as Dixon, Durran and Smith Roads. Many farms are also predicted to subside 1.6 metres or more. This would make it worse than any other mine in the country as far as I'm aware, Mr President. Mr Sam Haddad, when Director General of the Planning Department, required the mining company as part of the Director General's requirements in 2012 that they must individually consult with all subsidence affected landholders during the preparation of the EIS. It's a matter of record that this was not done. During the 10 years that Cores have held the exploration lease, as far as I'm aware, they have never consulted directly with any of the 245 affected landholders. After spending many hours trying to work out the subsidence damage, Professor Philip Pells concluded that the EIS, and in particular the MSEC subsidence impact prediction on houses, has been presented in such a way that it is impossible to determine the likely damage to any particular house. That is, it is impossible for a particular landowner to work out as what is predicted for his or her home. Professor Pell said in an email to Mr Alan Hayes, and I quote, "There is a list of 245 houses numbered 1 to 245, but without location defined, and there are plans showing each house but without being numbered. So one cannot relate the list and the damage details in that list to the houses on the maps. I thought I could work out the numbering system by carefully studying the subsidence prediction contours in relation to the house positions. My conclusion from this is that the numbering of the houses has been made chaotic, inverted commas, so that it is impossible to know what damage category, in what damage category a particular house will fall," unquote. Mr President, it's almost like the mining companies trying to cover their tracks and make unknowable the damage they will wreak upon the community. In a further email to Alan Hayes, Professor Pells said further, it's a very lengthy email and I won't quote it verbatim, but essentially there was the focus of the, and I'll just quote one bit, so the focus of the report at this stage of the approval process was to provide indication of overall spread of subsidence predictions and potential impacts for houses rather than predictions and assessments at an individual level. If landowners independently looked up our report to find out what the predictions are based on the mine plan right now, they would be forgiven for thinking that these were the numbers that will apply to the house if the mine was approved. They may not realise that mine plans can change in the future. This might create extra angst in the future if the predictions from the final layout were higher than those shown at the moment because the longwalls have shifted or changed orientation or something, unquote. So again, the information presented in the EIS is presented in such a way that the community and the members of it are not able to ascertain what is predicted for their home. I find that shocking, I find that scandalous, and I find even more shocking and scandalous the inaction of the government around this issue. Even if they hadn't made those commitments, which they obviously have, but in particular, given those commitments, how they could not keep faith with their community on the Central Coast is beyond understanding. In stage 1 of the proposed mine, 150 brick homes in the modern rural Huey subdivision sit directly above Wallarah tough material, which is described as unstable and unpredictable, casting doubt on the validity of the miner's subsidence figures. Wallarah tough is described in all mining manuals as being particularly difficult material to stabilise. This puts the Wallarah 2 proposal into the realms of a dangerous experiment, risking the fabric of many family homes. From 2002 to 2012, the Mining Subsidence Board has only accepted 45% of subsidence claims, many of which still remain unpaid as people have to slug it out in the Mining Warden's Court. In 2014, the PAC accepted that the economic analysis in the EIS was grossly flawed, and there will be little economic value flowing to the government and the Central Coast region. It was further found that royalties and other miscellaneous income streams back to the government from the mine would be far less than the subsidised benefits the miners would receive from government, leaving New South Wales shelling out more than it was going to receive from the project. The damage to public infrastructure, in particular the 39 high voltage electricity transmission towers and rail upgrades, has never been fully assessed or addressed, or determining who will cover the cost. Even at a conservative estimate, Mr President, this would run into many millions of dollars. This project is just economically as well as socially irrational. Approval of the Wallarah 2 coal project was also dependent upon consent from the Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council to allow the mining company to build a rail spur through their land. This consent was refused and the matter was taken to the Land and Environment Court, which ruled that the development application was defective and could not be approved without the Land Council's consent. The government has, of course, had to accept the court's decision. Forced mediation between the Land Council and the mining company has also failed, with access consent still being withheld. Operation Spicer, well known to all of us in this place, which saw the demise of a number of Liberal Party members of Parliament in terms of their careers, revealed secret meetings between the mining company and senior ministers of the then O'Farrell government, including a trip to South Korea to the mining company's head office and dinner party with senior ministers and executives of the mining company at one of the executives' home. Is there a causal nexus between this close association and the inaction of the government, I ask, perhaps rhetorically? The community and local government have soundly rejected this project since its inception because the risks are so great to the water supply of the Central Coast region, some of whom in this House, of course, live in that region, because of the dangerous health outcomes to residents. The Duralong and Yarramalong water catchment is the major water resource for more than 350,000 people, as I indicated, and the growing housing development in the northern area of Wyong Shire, which sits beside the proposed coal mining loading and transport facility. It should be noted that in September 1950, the New South Wales Government Gazette, number 153, proclaimed the Wyong Water Supply Catchment District to be preserved in connection with the Wyong water supply under the control of the Council of the Shire of Wyong. So it's of direct interest to them, not only as end users but also as local regulators. Another great issue of concern affecting the Central Coast community is the legacy issues. In June 2016, the Korean Times reported that the project's parent company, the South Korean government-owned Korea Resources Corporation, is to quit its overseas development operations. The company's debt ratio stands at a staggering 6,905%, and according to the Korean Board of Audit and Inspection, a total of 35.8 trillion Korean won was invested in overseas resources development, with little gains so far, leading Koreas to slash 118 international jobs. The announcement that the company will be withdrawing of course, is and should be of great concern to the people of the Central Coast and others who oppose the mine, because the problem is that the remedial and rehabilitation work that the mine company undertook to do in its original application could well be unrealised because the proponent, Wyong Coal Proprietary Limited, has a paid-up capital of only $400. The total liability of this company is limited to the total amount of its paid-up capital. It could simply walk away and leave the Central Coast community and the state government having to bear the burden of this cost. Given the reported financial woes of the parent company and its move to withdraw from overseas resource development, it seems highly unlikely that the current proponent would itself want to develop the mine directly and may wish to simply on-sell to an approved licence, raising the question of who will pick up the tab, because any sound purchaser coming in probably wouldn't want to foot the bill for the liabilities of the past. In addressing the requirements for the amended DA, the proponent must take into account other community interests. In its proposal, the proponent mentions nothing about the development currently being examined for Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Council land through a building proposal that intends initially to subdivide 500 building lots on land directly adjacent to the mine project boundary. The Australian Coal Alliance received legal advice that the department is bound to take into account the proposed development of this land, given that it has progressed to a stage where the department has determined that the planning proposal should proceed and has directed Central Coast Council to make the local environment plan. The legal advice further states that the requirement to consider the planning proposal falls within section 79 capital C1E of the EP&A Act 1979, which requires the department to consider the public interest when assessing applications. Likewise, the department is also required to consider the planning proposal under section 79C1B, which requires the department to consider the social and economic impacts in the locality of the development. In both cases, it is necessary to show that the impact of the coal project on the development proposed under the planning proposal is relevant and that the department is bound to take that into account because of its relevance. But it has so far failed to do so. So there are 500 houses on the boundary of the coal loader that have not been taken into account. Moreover, the new proposed coal loader, which is 9 stories high, approximately 300 metres from the suburb of Blue Haven in the Wyong State Electorate, the people who live in those areas knew nothing about this proposal, and the impact on them will be significant, not just in relation to dust, but also to noise. The mining company has failed to address those issues. The government and the members in this House now have a further opportunity to support Labor's private members' bill, which of course has twice been passed up in the other place, and fulfil the promise that was made to the community in both 2007 and importantly 2011, because that was the election that saw this government take office. Now is the chance to support the legislation that will block this mine once and for all. There is no case now for approving a mine under water catchments when the area is experiencing such a massive urban population growth. Across the state, we all know there is significant pressure on scarce land for the provision of new homes for an increasing population and to address the need for affordable housing. But coal mines that potentially, in this case, probably will affect water supplies negatively are simply not consistent with meeting those needs. Imagine a whole community whose water is put at risk. It is or should be unthinkable. This bill is an opportunity for every member of this House to not only protect the water supply of the Central Coast, but to put the interests of the community first instead of the interests of overseas big business and big money, which may withdraw from the project and leaving the Central Coast community and the state of New South Wales with a liability that will never be met. As I reach the conclusion of my second reading speech, I'd like to pay tribute to the hard work of David Harris MP. He has fought hard since 2006 to have this project stopped, and he paid the price when he lost his seat in 2001 on the back of, a frankly dishonest campaign by his opponents. Rather than give up, he returned to the fight. He won back the electorate of Wyong and has since continued to represent them in this and many other struggles. I also recognise not only his hard work, but the work of all of those who over years have sought to protect valuable water from this inappropriate mining proposal, including Alan Hayes and all those involved in the Australian Coal Alliance in this connection. I commend the bill to the House.